of the Egg Industry Issues Forum. We hope you all had a wonderful evening last night. Since you get to hear Dr. Ramirez's voice twice today presenting information, you have a new moderator this morning. My name is Lisa Gold, and I'm the Program Manager and Communications Specialist for the Egg Industry Center. So we want to go ahead and start our day off again by expressing our gratitude to all the sponsors who make Egg Forum possible. Of course, our co-host, Highline North America, helps support all of the various activities associated with the forum. And then this year, you also attended a celebration that was sponsored by Farm Credit Mid-America and other supporting sponsors last night. So again, we thank our major sponsors, but what you might not know is that we have a host of other sponsors that step alongside and do specific events for us here during the forum, and then also a group of supporters that come alongside us and help with things like speaker travel, staff travel, and all kinds of other things. So this event could not happen without sponsors, so we are grateful for everything that they do for us. At this point, just asking you this morning to check your cell phones, make sure you're in silent mode, and if you need to, go ahead and step out and take your calls. But we're going to have Dr. Brett Ramirez kick us off this morning. You heard him yesterday speak, but not necessarily on research. So this morning, he's going to talk to you about a research project that he's working with. And I'd like to give a formal introduction of him today since he didn't get one yesterday. So Dr. Ramirez is a two-time graduate of the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign with both his bachelor's and his master's in agriculture and biological engineering. He then obtained his PhD at Iowa State University in the same discipline. Dr. Ramirez's expertise is in swine and poultry housing, ventilation, energy efficiency, and bioenergetics. This also encompasses instrumentation and environmental control methods, as well as holding a thorough understanding of animal thermal comfort, environment, air quality, and emissions. So he was also involved in some of the emissions work that EIC also did, and you'll hear him share about later on as well. So with that, we're going to welcome Dr. Ramirez back up to the stage for him to present to you this morning.
Thank you, Lisa. All right. So I'll keep this brief, just because we haven't fully completed the project yet, but still interesting nonetheless. So we had a project funded by the EIC, I think about probably 2 years ago now, and basically looking at a different way of how do you assess different dust mitigation practices for litter inside the barn, and how we kind of standardize that approach, and how can we do it quickly, efficiently, and be able to move through different ways to mitigate dust inside the barn. So, as we all know, generation rates of dust or particulate matter, as the more technical phrase, and ammonia from the litter are impacted by depth, moisture content, and we know as litter gets drier, it creates more dust. As it gets more moist, there's less dust. So our goal here is really looking at how do we create something that we can test this, and if somebody has a product, a strategy, something of that nature that we can add, how do we test it, get some results quickly, see if it works. And so that's really what we're focused on. So what I'll show here today is kind of how the system works, how it's set up, and a little bit on the impact of litter moisture content on dust generation, which hopefully we all know the answer to that one. That one should not be the surprise. And then different polymers, as I'll show later, when you add those polymers to the litter, how do they work on reducing dust generation potential. So here's our experimental setup. Basically, we took 3 modified concrete mixers and added a cap to them, some tubing, some programming, concrete mixers, create dust, sample it, and see what the results are. So the system works, I'd say, pretty well. I think there's a few hiccups still that we're working on, but Otherwise, from, by turning that concrete mixer, it creates a fairly even amount of dust and generation as that thing slowly turns, during the mixing process. So basically, there's 3 of these things. That tube coming out of the middle there runs back to that, board, and that's where we do all the sampling from. With that one vacuum pump, so that's how we pull all that air back, able to sample it, weigh the filter, pre and post the dust being generated, and determine how it. So we created a custom LabVIEW program, basically that you can enter in how long you want it to run for, how long you want it to settle for. So if you want to run for 5 minutes, settle for 5 minutes, run for 10 minutes, settle for 30 minutes. So any different combination of how you want the dust to be produced, you have that ability to customize its operation. And so also have it on the sampling side. So basically just kind of just fine tune this program so that when we're going through and evaluating the dust generation, that we can make it work, and we're not fixated on one potential, just one way to do it. So if you've never seen inside a concrete mixer, that's what it looks like when we have poultry litter in there. So we got some cage-free litter from supporting entities nearby. So we put about 3 kilograms in each mixer, and then basically, the easy way to do it is to just weigh a paper filter before and after to have a mass that's collected out that filter. So get into it a little bit later, we went eventually to the more complicated way to do it, but that's just a simple way to do it. It's easy, it's repeatable, and it gives you a pretty good indication of how much dust is coming off, because it's just, you're weighing a clean filter and a dirty filter. So we did a couple different trials. So we did like a 6 cycle and a 12 cycle. So we were looking at, when you run it 6 times versus 12 times. And we're still probably more on the procedure side of things, and we're not on probably the evaluating different polymers or different strategies to reduce dust generation potential. So first test we did was just a uniformity test. So we're just trying to make sure, if you put 3 kilograms of litter in each of these, is it going to be similar? Or do we have 3 very independent systems working? And I'd say we probably do have 3 independent systems working. They were actually quite a bit different than probably what most of us would have expected when you throw 3 kilograms of litter from the same place in 3 different mixers, and we got pretty much 3 different results, I would say. So that was not what we were expecting. So that's not a bad thing, I would say. It's just something that we have to account for and make sure that those mixers are more doing the same thing over time versus trying to do each of them do the same thing. So we'll see, we had a little bit of variation, a little bit of mass. I typically don't work in the 0.01 grams of things, so that was also something that somehow found a laboratory scale that could measure it down that low. Because that was one of my concerns, is also how much dust do you have to collect to actually have a difference? And what's your accuracy of your scale to make sure how much do you have to get to make sure that when you weigh that filter, you actually have something different. So we went through that, the uncertainty on the scale, lab scales are quite good at what they do, and that's actually quite a very small, much smaller number than I thought it would be. But so something like a, 0.02 gram difference is actually measurable with that setup. So when you add moisture to litter, guess what? Dust goes down. So we just did this just more of a proof of concept than actually trying to optimize what's the best litter moisture content or how much moisture changes dust generation potential. But mainly we just wanted to make sure that when we put litter into the system and we add something that we know is going to make the dust generation potential go down, it happens. And so that's why this is just more proof of concept. And so we went from 17% originally to 20%. Then we went up to 25% litter moisture content just to, again, make sure everything worked, and it did. Then the last little bit was adding polymer treatment. So we bought some off-the-shelf stuff. I think one of those was ground glue. The other one was the landscape block. So we added 32 milliliters of that landscape block to litter, and then 334 milliliters to of the ground glue to litter. So if you've never used these products before, those dosage rates of milliliters probably doesn't mean a whole lot, but I can tell you that is a heck of a lot of stuff. And so my grad student at the time was following the directions as any good grad student would, and didn't probably think about the economic and practical side of that one. So we put on a lot of polymer treatment. And so the next slide is going to show, yes, it definitely worked, because we added at rates that you can't afford. So we are going to fix this and go through and actually dose at better rates that are reasonable, that somebody could expect to do in practice. But yeah, he was doing it. We were looking at it and just like, so how much actually do you put on? He's like, well, I don't know, I just follow the instructions. And I'm like, yeah, no, we're not gluing mulch down here. It's a little bit different. So again, looking at polymer 1, I think was that landscape block, and polymer 2 was the ground glue. And so as you see, as you put that in the litter, it definitely does decrease how much dust comes out of there. And we also have a little bit of variability issues between the mixes, but for the most part, as it goes from initial to post cycling, we do see a nice change in the dust generation potential. So with that, because I appreciate keeping things on time, since I do have to pick this back up here in a couple hours, we made a lab scale proof of concept dust generation potential sampling system, tested some different polymers, and we hopefully my goal is to get this back up and running here soon, just to try more and get better dosing rates that are more reflective of what somebody could actually probably do in practice. I also added in real-time particulate matter monitoring, so we can see the fractional sizes coming off the dust. Then finally get into a economic analysis, so we can actually see is this cost effective? Is this something somebody should pursue in practice? So that take any questions.
Brent, do those polymers, just hypothetically, the next stage with a cage-free bird, get them on their feet? I mean, how sticky are those polymers?
When you put them in as what we did, they're pretty sticky.
Yeah.
So that's where we'll have to evaluate that as we go, just because that's probably one of our concerns. What does it do to pads and the flooring and the housing system?
Yeah.
Because that's commercial stuff, and that's not specifically meant for the poultry industry. So we'll have to look at that kind of as we go through it.
Yeah, so just to follow up on that, Brett, so you're saying we don't know what it does to the metal, we don't know.
Yeah.
So there's still a long way to go.
Yep.
I would just share that, from my perspective, after labor considerations, in cage-free, this is what I consider to be our number 2 challenge for the industry, both inside the building and fugitive dust, and whatever we can do to help and assist and encourage this work to move forward, we need it. This is important. Thank you.
But I just try to understand your concentration, general concentration, because your unit is a gram, and then even the 100, 0 point something gram, that's a milligram, right? Then in the poultry house, they're now concentrating in the microgram level. So is that more kind of representative of the poultry production environment?
Yep, good question. So I would say, once we did get our dust tracked on there, so we are probably on the very high end of what would be measurable in a commercial poultry house. And so, we're in grams because we, start mixing, let the dust accumulate on the filter, stop mixing, and that's how we get to our milligrams of, dust added to the filter media. But we're high, but we're intentionally high, right? We want to generate a lot of dust to make sure that when we add a treatment, because we have to be able to detect a difference, right? And so if the system can't generate enough dust to be different after you add a treatment, then, the system's not very effective. So we are on the high side. I think our particle fractions are probably a little bit on the larger side. We don't do a lot. The fine dust, I think, was a little bit harder for us to generate than what you'd see in practice, but we're still working on that.
All right, let's give Dr. Merritt a hand. I am not as tall as Dr. Merritt. Okay, so we are going to continue with our next research presentation, which is from Dr. Jude. She hails to us from University of California, Davis. She is a doctoral graduate of the University of Georgia, where her research involved optimizing and developing molecular diagnostic tests for avian respiratory pathogens, particularly MS, MG, and ILT. She joined the Poultry Medicine Lab at the University of California, Davis in 2001 and is a postdoctoral scholar where her focus has been on addressing current issues in the industry. The projects she's been involved with there include streamlining molecular classification and conducting vaccine tests for infectious coryza, surveillance monitoring for infectious bronchitis and reovirus, evaluating IBV strains causing disorders using molecular tools and challenge models, and testing novel approaches to control infectious bronchitis using supplemental antibodies. So let's welcome Dr. Jude to the stage.
Thank you guys for having me. As Lisa said, my name is Rachel Jude. I'm a postdoc at UC Davis Poultry Medicine Lab. I'm working under Dr. Rodrigo Gallardo. So right now, Dr. Gallardo's on sabbatical, so you get me. But if you have any burning questions that I haven't learned the answers to yet, I'm going to provide his email at the end so you can email him. The projects I'm going to be discussing today are related to our work over the past couple of years addressing false layer syndrome and infectious bronchitis and the role of vaccines and maternal antibodies and how they play into FLS development. So a brief agenda. I'm first going to talk about the impact of false layer syndrome on layers and breeders, and then get into two studies that we've recently completed, the first of which looked into the role of IBD maternal antibodies and early vaccination on FLS development. And the second, which looked at the protective effects of supplemental delivery of IBD antibodies. And then I'll finally discuss some of our future goals given the results that I'm going to talk about. So false layer syndrome is what it sounds like, right? It's where you have birds that ovulate normally and look otherwise healthy but don't lay. So quite a while ago, this study by Broadfoot associated FLS with IBD, and they showed a very clear trend showing that earlier IBD exposure in flocks would result in a greater likelihood of FLS at production. So from this, they suggested that maternal antibodies may prevent the development of abnormal oviducts when chicks are exposed to virulent IBV. But we don't really know the mechanism and secondary effects of this passive immunity. So that really brings up two questions for us. One, are maternal antibodies actually playing a role? And how much of a factor is IBV virulence on these FLS outcomes? So IBV is primarily, it has primarily acute respiratory presentation, but certain strains have also been implicated in producing urogenital disease, such as Massachusetts and Australian T, QX-like strains, DMV-like strains, and California 1737-like. So in a way, we've kind of demonized these particular strains as the ones that are causing reproductive harm. However, I want to look at the history of these strains a bit. So as they have emerged, the level of their adaptation or viral fitness over time has changed the tissues that they affect. So we usually start with seeing kidney issues, and then that sort of morphs into reproductive problems. And then as they finally adapt, they start to show those primary respiratory issues. So the bottom line I want to get to is that we can't point at a particular strain and say that it's going to affect reproduction. It's all the same virus, they're just at different levels of adaptation. So we want to be really careful about demonizing particular strains. So if we put adaptation and tissue tropism aside, we also have to remember that early challenge to immunologically naive birds, whether it's by a wild type strain or vaccines, that can cause inflammation anywhere we have epithelial tissues. So oviducts, kidneys, testes, respiratory tracts. And that early inflammation can lead to chronic repercussions. So as an example, it's very common in old hens who have received vaccines early in life to have these urate deposits in the kidneys. So keeping those things in mind, we'll look at the results of the studies. So the first study I'm going to discuss was looking at the roles of IBD maternal antibodies and early vaccination on FLS development. So our hypothesis was that IBD maternal antibodies dampen the development of acute IBD-related symptoms and long-term urogenital disorders in chickens challenged at an early age. And to test that hypothesis, our objective was to compare the development of acute respiratory symptoms and urogenital disorders in chickens with and without maternal antibodies. In this study under a Georgia 08 vaccine and a DMV 1639 challenge. So we received eggs and hatched SPF and commercial chicks. These SPF chicks are specific pathogen free, so they have no maternal antibodies. Meanwhile, the commercial eggs were donated from a commercial breeder complex that vaccinated with a live mass, con, ARC, and Holland in the pullet phase, and then an inactivated mass before the onset of lay. So at hatch, a subset of these birds received an ocular vaccination with a live Georgia 08. Then 3 days later, a subset of the birds received an ocular nasal challenge of DMV 1639. So that gave us 8 groups to observe the effects of whether we have maternal antibodies or not, and the application of vaccine challenge or both. So early in the study, we observed respiratory signs, viral shed, and antibody levels. We then raised the birds to 20 weeks of age, at which point we again looked at antibody levels and also weights, pelvic distances, and started looking at egg production. We then took the birds to 30 weeks of age, at which point we necropsied them, and again looked at the weights and pelvic distances, and also gross lesions, microscopic lesions, and viral loads. So as we go through the results, I just want to reinforce what we're observing. So the presence or absence of maternal antibodies, and then the interaction of vaccine and challenge when we either have those maternal antibodies or not. So now we'll take a look at some of the results. Something I also want to mention is that this study has a sister study where we collaborated with another group. They used the exact same design. The only difference was they had a different breeder stock, so they had a different breeder vaccination program. And they also looked at MA5 vaccine instead of Georgia 08. And they had very similar results to what I'm about to show you. So an important consideration in this study was to first ensure that all of our commercial birds had maternal antibodies at hatch. So we get a big check mark for that. There's also two things that I want you to notice about this graph. First, these maternal antibodies decay very quickly. So by 2 weeks of age, almost all the birds were negative for antibodies. And second, and I'm gonna bring this up again when I talk about the second study, even though all the birds were positive for IBV antibodies at hatch, there's a pretty huge range in those titers, and some of those are pretty close to our cutoff values. So we next looked at respiratory signs, such as conjunctivitis or gasping. But I also want to mention some IBV respiratory signs can be more subtle than this. So when we look at respiratory signs in terms of severity scores, we see that all the SPF birds receiving some form of IBV scored statistically higher than commercial birds, meaning that maternal antibodies would greatly reduce early clinical signs. So when we look at the results for egg production, we can't directly compare SPF production to commercial birds because SPF birds are not bred for producing eggs. But we can look at trends. So all of the groups of the SPF birds which got IBV, whether it's vaccine, challenge, or both, had significantly lower egg production than the untreated group. And when we looked at the commercial birds, we see that maternal antibodies help to maintain egg production levels. But there was an exception to this, in that the maternal antibodies were unable to prevent production drops when IBV challenge was overwhelming. We also measured distances between the pelvic bones to see if we could externally assess possible reproductive issues. So for this SPF group, all the distances were lower than the control, and these distances were significantly lower in the SPF birds that received just the challenge. So while perhaps not foolproof, a pelvic examination is useful in determining if you have reproductive issues going on. So one of the classic pathologies of false layer syndrome is the development of large cysts in the oviduct. When we compare the incidence of cystic oviduct in SPF birds versus commercial birds, we see very clearly that maternal antibodies reduce the incidence of cystic oviduct. But something else we see is that those groups that received the live vaccine had an even higher chance of developing cystic oviduct compared to those who just received a wild type challenge. So when we move on to look at microscopic lesions in the oviducts, we observed the same thing we saw with the gross cystic oviduct scores. So first, the pathology was lower when maternal antibodies were present, and second, vaccination had a greater impact on lesion presence than challenge. Another lesion associated with false layer syndrome is atrophy of the oviduct. Again, we see that maternal antibodies reduce the incidence of oviduct atrophy. And we also saw that atrophy was a greater issue when birds received both vaccine and challenge. So one of the consequences of oviduct atrophy is changes in the anatomy of the oviduct, and that might have relation to internal lay. And one of the ways of measuring internal lay is to look at egg yolk peritonitis. So when we observed this particular pathology, we saw that maternal antibodies would reduce the incidence of yolk peritonitis when the IBV loads are low. However, when the maternal antibodies were unable to reduce yolk peritonitis was when both challenge and a vaccine were applied. So that indicates when you have really high IBV loads in early life, there might be oviduct damage even with those maternal antibodies. So I'm going to really quickly switch from talking about the effects of maternal antibodies on reproductive tracts to telling you about what we saw in the kidneys. So on gross examination, we didn't see any issues with the kidneys. However, when we looked at microscopic lesions, we observed that maternal antibodies can be a factor in lowering the occurrence of these lesions, but that strain might be a factor in whether the lesions occur also. So why is this important if we didn't see major kidney issues with the gross examination? This can become an issue because when you have small lesions that affect kidney function, when those layers start getting the higher calcium diets at the end of production, those high calcium diets in conjunction with the minor lesions can usually result in internal urate deposits, and that leads to more severe renal disease. So in conclusion for this study, there's a clear effect of maternal antibodies on preventing chronic reproductive issues and on reduction of egg production. While vaccine can provide protection against pathology and clinical signs in the presence of maternal antibodies, its effect can be detrimental in the absence of maternal antibodies. And even though certain IBV types have been associated with oviductal pathology, it seems like it's more linked to the presence of maternal antibodies and the time of infection. And then without maternal antibodies, early IBV vaccination may cause lesions that, while not evident on gross pathological observation, could increase the incidence of disease throughout the life of the bird. So some take-home messages for you for this study. Maternal antibodies or the day of age vaccination are extremely important. So we want to make sure that those breeder flocks are well vaccinated because the maternal antibodies help to buffer early challenge and early vaccination secondary effects. Next, breeder vaccination strains don't necessarily need to match the field challenge strain. And then challenge load, whether it's by wild type or vaccine, can correlate with incidence. So strict biosecurity at early ages is key. And maternal antibodies are not uniform in chicks. However, lower maternal antibody levels can lead to breakthrough FLS cases despite thorough breeder vaccination. And that last point is going to lead into why we were thinking of our second study. So that's where we looked into protective effects of supplemental delivery of IBV antibodies. So let's take a step back and review the importance of passive immunity. So again, we know from long ago, there's a correlation between the age of exposure to IBV and the incidence of FLS at maturity. Our previous study showed that IBV maternal antibodies protect against cystic oviduct atrophy, peritonitis, and egg production drops, as well as acute respiratory symptoms. And we also saw that maternal protection is dependent on the intensity of IBV challenge. So I told you I would bring this graph back. So this is maternal antibody titers in commercial layers at hatch from the previous study. So while all these commercial chicks have maternal antibodies, they're not uniform at hatch. And we also see that those maternal antibodies will essentially disappear before 2 weeks of age. With these things in mind, we want to think about methods to passively administer and mimic maternal antibodies. So there have been numerous laboratory studies showing temporary protection or therapeutic action against several enteric pathogens, as well as numerous viral pathogens with chickens. There's also one study particular to IBV, where IBV ostrich antibodies were shown to protect the upper respiratory tract against IBV-induced inflammatory responses. These antibodies can be harvested for this use from serum or egg yolks. But the described application methods in all these studies are either intravenous injection or gavage, so they're not really effective for mass administration to native age chicks. So we also want to be thinking about practical applications for commercial poultry use. So with all this in mind, right, the knowledge that maternal antibodies are protective, the non-uniformity of maternal antibody titers at hatch, which can allow breakthrough infections, the idea that antibodies can be administered to mimic maternal antibodies and protect, but that the administration methods that are available to us are not suitable for mass application. That gives us the formation of our research question. So in this study, we are hypothesizing that supplemental delivery of IBV antibodies to chicks by both in vivo and spray methods will be protective against IBV challenge. And to test this, our objective was to test different methods of administering IBV hyperimmune serum to naive chicks and determine the protection elicited against challenge. So this is our experimental design. We produced hyperimmune serum by introducing SPF chickens to alternate dose of live and inactivated N41 over several weeks, and then bleeding them to obtain serum with ELISA titers around 13,000. We obtained and incubated SPF eggs. At 19 days of embryonation, a third of those eggs were subject to in vivo immunization. All the eggs were allowed to hatch, and then on the day of hatch, another third of those chicks were spray immunized with the serum, and the last third of the chicks were left without immunization. And then at 7 days of age, half the birds were challenged with N41 ocular nasally. So this gave us 6 groups consisting of birds that received one of the 3 immunizations. So they got spray, in vivo, or nothing. And then those were split into 2, so each of those 3 groups either got challenge or no challenge. We then sampled the birds at 3, 5, and 10 days post-challenge, and looking at respiratory signs, viral loads, and antibody levels. And then finally, at 21 days post-challenge, we necropsied the birds, scoring sinuses and air sacs, taking tracheas and kidneys for histo, and collecting tracheal washes, colloidal swabs, lungs, and kidneys for viral load assessment. So at 5 days post-challenge, we see that the spray immunization, birds that received challenge, so here, had significantly lower respiratory distress compared to the non-immunized and challenged birds. But that respiratory distress was not reduced to the non-challenge levels. We also looked at viral loads in the coinal class at 5 days post-challenge. So here we're looking at genome copy numbers and then different treatments. And we saw no differences in viral loads of challenge birds receiving these different immunizations. At 21 days post-challenge, we scored the sinuses and air sacs, and in both instances, the severity of sinus pathology and air saculitis was reduced with spray application. We also looked at deciliation of the tracheas at 21 days post-challenge, and again, we saw that spray application reduced the damage to trachea cilia. So in conclusion, spray applications shows promising results in terms of lowering acute respiratory signs and pathological effects of IBV challenge. We were able to mimic the effects of maternal antibodies in SPF chicks. So spray application of hyperimmune serum in commercial layer chicks may be useful in bringing maternal antibody levels to uniform levels and extending the protection that they provide during early life. So these are some next possible steps based on these results. So we want to investigate spray application efficacy in commercial layer chicks possessing natural maternal antibodies. We also need to test antibody dosage levels of hyperimmune serum needed for that protection. And also we want to assess the effect of exogenous antibodies on protection against long-term pathology induced by early IBD challenge. So essentially repeating that first 30-week study. And with that, thank you to the UC Davis Poultry Medicine Lab members, the Jordan Lab at UGA who did that sister study with us, and also the Egg Industry Center and our other funders. And with that, I would gladly take any questions.
Just over here, just for some policy context, do you have any sense of how much of bird productivity, flock productivity is generally reduced by the presence of this respiratory infection? I mean, is this prevalent, and is this reducing productivity, throughout the U.S. flock?
IBV in general, if you have active infection, it will cause a reduction in production. And like we're showing here, if you have IBV early in life and you don't have good protection, that also is going to cause issues with reproduction.
So you may not have a feeling for this, but I'm curious what this means for the U.S. flock and their productivity as a whole. How prevalent is this problem, and how much is productivity harm for the flock? Any sense of that at all, or is that?
I'm not sure what the current state is. I know that FLS isn't as big of an issue as it was a couple of years ago, especially, we had major problems in the Delmarva area and in Canada. I think those are, if they're not resolved, they've died down.
Nice work, Rachel. Question on the first study. Was there any impact in eggshell quality in those older layers? Did anybody look at eggshells?
No, that's not something we looked at. I mean, I can tell you from picking up the eggs every day, I didn't notice anything major. So.
Okay. And is the second study with the hyperimmunization, is that like RSV, what they're trying to do with children?
I'm not sure. Can you elaborate what they're doing?
Well, they're not giving infants, a viral vaccine, but they're giving antibodies, I believe. Is this the same concept?
Yeah, it's similar, right? I kind of equate it to what we did to treat COVID. So people would go in and get plasma, and that's essentially the same thing we're doing here. It's passive immunization.
Okay, good. And then lastly, what's the long-term implications of us carrying hens out at 95 or more weeks? Are we opening ourselves up if they've been exposed to a nephrogenic type that might lead to kidney damage later in life?
I mean, if you have early infection and you have even those small lesions, if the older your chickens get and if you're changing their diet, you can start to see more kidney issues.
How about boosting hens later in life?
I'm not sure about the answer to that one.
Okay. I know some complexes are doing that and making a difference. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, a couple questions. In your second study, why didn't you look at the sub-Q administration of antibodies? And the other question I have is, we've had all this false layer syndrome in Persian layers. Why is that? You know, like, they have overlooked.
I'm not really sure. Your first
First
question?
question, why did you use the sub-Q administration route for the antibodies?
I think that was just a limitation of material that we had, right? We couldn't test every administration method, but we wanted to get maybe the most simple methods for mass administration.
Yeah, the sub-Q route is used all the time in commercial layers.
Mhm.
And there'd be a separate injection from Merck's vaccine.
Yeah, I mean, that is something that would be a good idea to look at. Like, we only had a limited amount of serum to test this out on, so it was spray and an ogo.
Any other questions for Dr. Jude? All right, let's give her a round of applause. All right, that provided some great insight on these topics that are important to flock health, which we discuss all the time as we're funding research. So it's good to hear the discussions and the questions. So now we're going to move to our final speaker again, Dr. Ramirez, as he highlights some updates from the projects that EIC is working on.
Definitely a bit shorter. So, you get to hear from me again, lucky all of you. So, I'm gonna take the first part of this presentation, then I'll have Mauro do the second part when we get there. So we're gonna kind of go through some things that we've been working on internally at the Ag Industry Center and kind of do a brief update on the status of some of these projects. So I'm gonna first kind of run through where we're at on external funding from the center and what kind of projects we've been able to fund in the last couple of years or last year. Kind of go through, as Tom kind of mentioned earlier, just bring up our evaluation on the EPA emission models, just so kind of puts it front and center again. I'm going to then run through the VSD Plus simulation tool that Rich has been working on, and then Marlo's going to take over on the K3 number update and clarification. So to start with the research update, we've funded over $2.5 million. I think since the start of the EIC 15 years ago, and that's gone to over 14 institutions across the United States and Canada, and I think we have 15 projects currently underway and 20 that have been finished up. So it's been a pretty remarkable journey over that 15 years, and the amount of impact that we've been able to have in across the industry and nationally. So looking at topics, if we break these down, we have, as generally expected, there's a focus on health and disease-related research projects, housing, animal environment, welfare, value-added, manure, sustainability. In the face of HPII, FDNN, Coryza, that just kind of has shifted the focus more towards those topics. So that's just kind of the priority and the way it's gone. So this is an important one to kind of show where we've been and where we want to be. So each year the researchers submit great ideas for projects that outstrip EIC's ability to provide the funds. So last year we were able to offer just over $344,000 in research funds, and we would like to do more for the industry. So our 2023 funding cycle call for proposals is going to launch next month, which I think is probably in a couple days now. And so that's why those donations that y'all witnessed yesterday are so critical to our mission and the sustainability really of the center in general. So if you have any questions on how the research arm of the Ag Industry Center works, let me know. talk to Lisa tomorrow. Be happy to discuss more on that subject. So with that, I'd like to transition to some updates on some of the work we've been doing. So I'm gonna put this up here, I'm not gonna spend a lot of time talking about it, but basically, so when the public comment period from EPA does become available, here is something that you might want to take a quick look at before you provide those comments if you need some general direction. If you don't feel like reading the 180-page report, as I've done probably 7 times now. This is a lot, I'd say a lot better written, a lot easier to read, but if you need access to this or need a starting point on how to provide some of those comments, I would say just take a look at this. It's much more distilled, heck of a lot easier to read. You can get through it a lot quicker than reading the full report on EPA's website. But that's available for everybody. It's a great starting point. Breaks it down, makes it easy to understand. But so, with that, I mean, as Tom mentioned yesterday, be on the lookout. You know, you will need information. Need to know a little bit of the background. We go through all of those things kind of to make it, you know, understandable, and how EPA might use these, which is still, I think, a little bit unclear at the moment. But it's something that you need to stay on top of, and when the time comes, be able to, you know, provide feedback for EPA on those things. All right. I'm going to run through the BSD web-based simulation tool, and now I'm going to ask Lisa, how do I go to full screen? Do you have any idea? Is there like a shortcut? I know it is on PC. I did Google it earlier, so I don't want to test the entry. And so Dr. Gates set out to you know, create a easy to use decision support tool that could be used, you know, from a mobile device, laptop, however you want to do it, to, you know, run a BSD calculation to figure out how much extra heat you might need when the time comes. So to achieve a barn temperature of 40 degrees Celsius or 140 degrees Fahrenheit within 30 minutes requires, you know, planning. There's a lot of other things that have to be done. And so what this tool does is basically estimates how much supplemental heat you need based on how much heat is already in the barn. So the screenshot there on the right is kind of the web page, and I'll show that here in a second, but it's just kind of easy to use. Punch in your information, you gotta know your information, and then move from there. So what do you need to know before you get involved in this? And so there are some critical things that some are hard to know, some are easy to know, some you can make some good educated guesses. But you know, dimensions, probably one of the most important ones to start. Thermal characteristics. I'm sure not everybody sits there and thinks about the R values of the walls, but you kind of need that because that's a major pathway for heat to get out of the building. But so, you know, if you have a framed wall, you know, what kind of insulation, do you have a SIP, panels, you know, having a general R value is critical for this, because or else we don't, you know, the model can't run without a good estimation of R values. You know, number of fans, size of fans, ceiling, the, you know, R value of the ceiling, or if it's like a work on if it's a multi-floor building, you know, how do you estimate that, and how to take that will eventually get that integrated into the system. So, number of supplemental heaters, quantity, so number of birds, species, and age of the birds. So we affect how much heat the birds produce based on all those factors. Inside temperature, outside temperature, and then probably one of the more critical ones is leakage. Right, so leakage is going to be that you know, if you're warmer inside the barn than outside, heat's going to go out, and that's going to cause things to be slower, need more heat. And so if we don't have a good estimate of leakage, and it's tough to do, but that's where we need help. Is how do you figure out that leakage rate so you can get a good reasonable value in there to make these calculations more accurate. Sure.
So, is there a body weight factor in that? I know this is meant for these and layers. Is there a body weight?
Yep. So we calculate metabolic heat production off of using body weight, age, temperature,
And then,
scale it.
how about stratification? It's temperature stratifies, and so do you account for cage birds and elevation versus only for birds?
No, so we treat it as a lumped mass, so the whole room is just one lumped mass. So there is no like mixing coefficient, there is no time delay for that heat and air to mix. So it's all one lump. It's a heck of a lot easier and quicker to model it that way. Probably very not representative of what happens, but to what extent does that matter? Not sure. But yeah, no, it's a lumped mass at the end of the day.
But some of these barns do have recirc fans in there, so you can mix, to answer the stratification.
Yes, and so yeah, anything that can help, you know, increase mixing is better. All right, so want to give a quick run through this, since we are hoping to really wrap this up here in the next couple weeks and get this out for everybody to actually use as a tool and make informed decisions. But more or less, this is the host website. So one of the things is you can either work in metric units, which I'm not going to do today. We are going to work in English units. And so if you do punch everything in metric and hit that button, it will go right over to English, so you don't have to, you know, play around with the conversions. You also notice there's an import barn data up there. So when we get to the end of this, you can actually save your barn data and then upload it into here, so you don't feel like punching in the same information over and over and over. You can just upload what you did the last time, and then it'll just pre-populate it into those fields. So if you pick a barn, we'll just go with, you know, this seems good for today. Let's see. So this is where I'd like to add a I don't know button. And so if you don't know what your frame wall R value is, typically, you know, 16 or 24 on center, you know, 2x6 stud wall is going to be probably right around an R16-ish, give or take for you. But we need an I don't know button because, you know, that is not something probably most people just think about on a daily basis, but you know, depending on how you have it, that'll come in. You got like a 1 foot stem wall, thickness, and then for fans, you know, we could use something like, I always have to remember these aren't feet because we never talk about fans in feet diameters, they're always in inches. R values, I'm probably like a 2. I mean, shutters leak like a sieve, and fans really don't have much, you know, insulated properties to them. You know, for a barn like this, you know, you might have, I don't know, 22. So then this is where we'll kind of factor in the different styles of housing, and so how that affects the, you know, heat transfer between, like, say, a multi-story aviary versus just a, you know, single barn. But if we could do something like high-rise, air changes per hour is that leakage rate, and so that's what is gonna, you know, have a big impact on these calculations. Ceiling, hopefully you're R30 is pretty normal. So hens, and then Paul was asking about this. So you can punch in the weight, you know, how many birds you have, how many weeks old, starting temperature. So if the inside of the barn is 71, outside is 20. Then it comes down to heater. So depends what you have as an auxiliary heater. So we'll just say it's a 500,000 BTUs, just to make it easy. And then maybe inside the barn you have 100,000 BTUs. And so after that, it's a quick click, and pretty remarkably quick due to computing power. But basically then you're going to get something like this. So I'm not sure if this is the final thing we want to show, but it's one thing that we would like to show, and so that's what we'll kind of work to make this more informative and give better information. And so for this random barn I just punched in, which probably doesn't really exist, it comes up with, 6 auxiliary heaters, each producing 500,000 BTUs for a total supply of 3 million BTUs, using that 100,000 BTUs of installed heat inside the barn. So, you can run this back and do it for a bunch of different use cases, and it'll punch out how much heat you need based on these conditions.
Could you show us the other axis at the bottom, how much time that takes?
Sorry. Yep. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'd like to get, outside temperature on here, just so that one doesn't have to punch in outside temperature every time they wanna look at it, just so, I think the week started off at 80 degrees, and I think we're gonna be at 35 this weekend. So, our temperature changes so quickly that it's easier to have all those outside temperatures, because if you're doing it one day to another, it literally could be a 50-degree difference outside. So it's important to, I think, have that different outside temperature on there to understand, how that impacts these calculations.
Right, they have a safety factor built in, because the original lookup table, we put a 1.5 safety factor, just because of the farmers probably have no idea about the leakage. Sometimes use half and sometimes use 1. So at least on the conservative side, make sure they have enough of heaters to do that.
Yes, I believe there is a 1.3 safety factor in there to make sure, just for that reason.
The other thing I wonder if, for different regions, from East Coast and West Coast and Midwest and South, may have a sort of a default. You check in a region, for each region they have general R values, and so producers don't know, then they could go in there fine tune the numbers, and so they wouldn't have to go through all these serious things. So
Yep, that's definitely something we could look at.
The different aging of the house, when they first built is 20, but by the time it got rodent, all this, deterioration, it could be down to 10, right?
Yep.
So.
Yeah, that's what, how to do, how is the best way to ask about leakage? I mean, that's, you just ask it in house age, you ask it in a general guide for construction quality, is it a tight house or is it a loose house?
Right.
Or do you somehow find a way to measure it? So that thing on leakage it's such a critical factor, but it's so hard to assess, and that's where there's, it comes down to, it takes an educated guess to do that. I'm back to having to use it back again. Alright, so just on that topic. So what I did is just use this to just punch in some things. These are all artificial barns, but just to quickly show, I don't want to spend a lot of time here. But, what happens if you double that leakage value? You go from 1 air change an hour to 2 air changes an hour. Something like that. Doesn't seem right, just one shouldn't be that big of a deal, but it is. So, like on this one, and sorry for this small pond, so the graph on the left is four heaters, graph on the right is 6, right? So that's just doubling the amount of leakage inside the barn. What happens when you change outdoor temperature? So I went from 20 degrees on the left scenario to -20. So both very possible in the upper Midwest. And again, you can see it goes from 4 to 6. Right, so that's 40-degree temperature difference was almost equivalent to 1 air change per hour on leakage. But if you have the stocking density, right, so now you have a lot less BTUs being produced by the birds inside the barn, and it goes from 4 to, what is it now? 5. But these are all kind of these, use cases. One, it's very quick to use, easy, but you can run through these different cases to figure out how to best, understand and make good decisions. So really, I'm going back to the leakage. We do need a simple way to quantify leakage in the field. It's definitely the biggest challenge on on inputting numbers is figuring out how tight the house is. Hopefully we're gonna get a user manual out here soon. Get this integrated into more workshops and training, so it makes sense. Get, that I don't know button, so everybody, if you don't know your R value, you have somewhere at least to start. That I will take any questions before we move over tomorrow.
I think we're gonna go ahead and hold questions so we can get the break. You can catch a break if you have specific questions on the tool. We'll get tomorrow started so we can stay on time.
Okay, there is a figure that have been presented in different places. Every time we talk with people about it, it seems that like I didn't explain myself well, so I want to go through some of this in detail. So it's a figure that combines different numbers into just one figure. So I want to go through each one of them first. The first one here is in red. We have the actual number of case-free layers on March each year. March because in the past USDA only reported case-free in March. And then if we continue growing at the same speed for the next few years, at the same speed that we grew in the last 6 years, that would be the number of case-free layers we could expect. But of course, if the market conditions are good, for case-free will be a higher number. If it's not as good, then it's going to be a lower growth. But basically, that's a projection of if we continue growing at the same speed. The second part of the figure is the customers' pledges, how many layers they would represent in total. The dark blue is the actual ones. The light blue is customers that made the pledge, but then they reverse their pledge. At the beginning, with all the pledges, we were needing 224 million case-free laying hens by 2026. Now with some customers backing down, it's about 159 is the number of case-free laying hens that we will need by 2026 to supply all these customers. The third part of that is the human population in the states that have legislation that will require cage-free by a certain year. It's not a one-to-one with the number of laying hens because there are some eggs that go into chocolate, ice cream, pasta, so they won't be really covered by this legislation, but it gives you a good idea of how much the demand for cage-free will change based on that legislation. And this is the figure that I think is very confusing, where I overlap everything into one figure, and if you look at the number of laying hens, cage-free laying hens, if we continue the same growth, will be just enough to cover what is needed for the customer pledges. But the green line, the green bar there is the cage-free laying hens needed for these legislations, and there is some overlapping between these two. So it's not that you can put one bar on top of the other, because there are some customers that sell cage-free eggs inside the states that we have, legislation. So therefore, if we put one on top of the other, it will be double counting. So there should be some assumptions on how much overlapping is, and that really changed the results. This is 3 levels of overlapping between customers' pledges and state legislations, and with the green bar should be how much is the overlap, the blue is the legislations only, and the yellow is customers' pledges only. And you can see that as more overlap between these two, the total number of cage-free layers needed is lower. And on top of that, there is another uncertainty, that is the number of eggs sold by customers that didn't pledge to buy only cage-free eggs outside this legislative state, because there are many customers that they didn't pledge it, they are outside the legislative state, but still offer cage-free for their customers, the consumers. So that's another uncertainty there. So I just wanted to show what I wanted to convey with that graph that was kind of messy, so. I don't know if you have any questions about it.
Mauro, based on what you tell us right now, are we on a path to make too many cage-free birds? Is that what you're telling me?
I don't know. It would really depend on the total demand. And my biggest concern is, so since we have some customers that already back down on their, pledges, if we're going to have more, and that's going to be the biggest uncertainty there.
How price responsive is the demand for eggs? What's the elasticity there?
Yeah, and that's a very good question, because there are two parts of that. The demand for eggs is very inelastic in general, so it's a minus 10%, which means that if you increase the price by 10%, you are expecting, from 1 year to the next, you are expecting a 1% decrease in the demand, total demand. But when you present the consumers with different choices at different prices, like the conventional egg and the cage-free egg at a higher price, the consumers for the most part choose the cheaper option, the conventional egg. So if you look only at the elasticity of the demand, you might say, okay, it's not a big deal. But for a supermarket that is offering their customers with different options, their customers tend to choose the conventional egg at a lower price. So if they cannot sell all these cage-free eggs at a premium, you will not have the money to turn around and pay their supplier, the producer, for this more expensive to produce cage-free eggs.
But do we have enough of a data set now in those states that require cage-free only to look at the elasticity of demand in response to the price of eggs in cage-free only states? And could that help you refine your estimates here? What kind of oversupply situation we might be heading into?
No, we don't have it because, in the past, the California Department of Food and Agriculture, they used to share information about how many eggs have been imported, and with that was kind of easy to estimate, consumption per person. But then a few years ago, they hadn't been willing to share that information. So it's, I didn't see any number of how this consumption per person changed in California after they implemented this. And there are some confounding factors there as well. In both times we have a big transition in California. 2015 with Proposition 2. And 2022 with the cage-free phase of Proposition 12. In both cases, we had avian influenza, which really made a lot of noise on the data, because some of this consumption decreased because of a lower supply and not so much, pricing. In terms of the price, how it changed delivered to the store door using the Urner Barry quotations. I compare California with the Northwest, and I think was Proposition 2, the average difference was about 18 cents, the increase in California with respect to the Northwest. I think the first phase of Proposition 12 was 24 cents, I think. I don't remember exactly, sorry. The second phase of Proposition 12, we have so much noise from the avian influenza and how it really affects the cage-free market in California that is, I don't know if I should even tell the number, Yeah, it had been 30 cents, but we need more data to really see if that's, is that a Proposition 12 effect, cage-free mandate effect, or is some of this noise created by the shortage of cage-free eggs during the outbreak.
Got it.
Okay, I'm gonna keep us all on time here simply because I know that many of you have to check out, and so.
We are at the Egg Industries Forum at the Hilton Hotel in Indianapolis. Today is October 26, 2023. Tell me who you are, sir, and what you do.
So, my name is Hongwei Shin. I'm currently the Dean of UTAG Research at the University of Tennessee. Prior to this position, which I started in April 2019, I was the founding director of the Egg Industry Center located at Iowa State University, and this is the annual Egg Industry Issues Forum, and where the goal of the center really is to serve the needs of the U.S. egg industry through research, education, and outreach.
And I believe some funding.
That's exactly right. So far, we have funded about 35 projects across 14 universities. And so again, this is a demonstration of this invested $2.5 million. Now that's just the money from the Egg Industry Center. And we also, that money has led to some leverage funding from other federal agencies. And so the goal is to really solve the practical issues facing the egg industry. So we are making impact. There are a lot of high impact research from animal welfare, environmental sustainability, and flock health.
And I understand you have quite a few publications, sir.
We do have quite a few publications. One of the hallmark publications from the EIC is the 50-year study that we're looking at advancement of the egg industry from 1960 to 2010. During that time, we produced 30 billion more eggs, yet the environmental footprint reduced by 63%. Just an example of how much the egg industry has advanced over that period of time.
And what is your future in your profession now, sir?
Well, my future right now as the Dean of UTAG Research is really our mission is to advance the science and technology and serving as a land-grant university. The mission is to serve the state and beyond, and through research, innovation, and application. And that's our goal, to serve all the citizens and the producers, the allied industry. Ultimately, our goal is to feed the world while protect the planet.
Dr. Shin, it's been an honor, and thank you for this opportunity
Thank you
to talk
very
to you.
much.
We're at the EIC Forum in Indianapolis. And tell me who you are, sir, and what you do.
I'm Pete Flock with Highline North America. I'm the president of the company.
And what do you do, sir?
We do the Dale distribution for Highline and Lohman genetics to egg farmers in the U.S. and Western Canada.
Okay. And why are you here, sir?
I've been was one of the founding members, our company was, and a large donor to the Egg Industry Center. Highline's main office is there in West Des Moines, Iowa, so it's just south of Ames. And I was also chairman of the board here for 4 years and stepped down last year for Jeff Henning to take over.
Wow. And what are some of the issues facing the center today?
Funding. Funding is our major issue. As you saw on that one slide, we have proposals for several $1 million of research, but are only able to come up with about $250,000 to $300,000 a year. So our goal is to raise more money to fund more research projects.
And what are your thoughts about the cage-free?
With cage-free, it's a matter of what your opinion is. I personally prefer caged eggs. Where you live in California, it's a law that you have cage-free. So my personal feeling is we'll be about 50-50 in the market.
Okay. And why is there such the discussion about cage-free versus cage? And is cage so terrible that?
It's a matter of perception. To me, so people think that if the birds are cage-free, that they're doing their natural dust bathing and doing everything. It's if you've been in a cage-free production house versus a caged house, you'll see a dramatic difference. So cage-free is just something that I just have not gotten used to, and if I have the choice, I'm always going to buy a caged egg.
Yes. And the life cycle of a hen is how long?
That'll vary. Some customers are not molting any longer, where they're forcing the birds into a rest. So if they're not molting, they'll run this 85 weeks of age. It's all contingent on the shell quality.
So one hen will live for how long in general?
If you're molting, a lot of times they're there for 2 years.
And molting means?
Molting is you take the bird, you change the feed ration, and you take the bird out of production, and it regenerates, it will refeather and regenerate, and then you come back into production.
So one curious, simple question that I'm not quite sure. How do birds get fertilized? How do they lay eggs over there?
So that's our side. So we have cage-free houses, and there will be a floor house with nests in it, and then you have about 8% males to female ratio.
Okay.
And so it's a natural mating. So the roosters will naturally mate with the females to produce the fertile hatching egg that we hatch at our hatcheries.
So the ratio of roosters to hens is roughly
8 to 10%.
Okay, so one
rooster would have 8 to 10 females.
Okay, that sounds like polygamy.
Yes.
Okay, well, certainly the egg industry and chickens in general, through the history of when they were first developed, I guess, I don't know how many thousands of years ago, that we have today's version of the hen and the laying of the eggs, and the science that's going into the discussions that we're having here is quite eye-opening to me.
Yes, it's
and
quite
as an end user, I just take the eggs, I crack them open, I'm going, oh, look, we got twins.
Right.
Now, what is twins, by the way? How does
When
that
you have a
happen?
double yolker?
Right.
So that basically, as the hens come into egg production, as their estrogen, their hormones start to flow, they're not fully synced up yet. And so if you ever look at, if you've posted a chicken, there's a clutch of eggs, almost looks like a bunch of grapes. And what will happen is until everything gets rolling correctly, she'll let 2 go at once. And so you'll get 2 smaller yolks. And that's, by the time, another week or 2, it's always early in production, you get double yolkers and then they're gone.
Also, I noticed that we have brown eggs and white eggs.
Yes.
And is there a difference in the thickness of the shell and all that stuff?
No, not really. So your brown eggs, just the shell pigment difference, and the browns are probably around 20% of the U.S. market.
And that's from brown hens?
Yes, it's actually a white Cornish cross on our parent side with a pure line Rhode Island red as a male.
Okay.
And then when they're hatched, the females come out with brown feathers, and the males come out yellowish, and so they're discarded.
Well, thank you, Pete. It's been certainly an eye-opening thing, especially for us chefs who just use the product.
Yes.
And then we buy eggs by the case, and when eggs go from $45 up to $150 a case because of the avian flu,
right.
We're going.
It pushes you hard.
Now
yes.
that little egg becomes a golden thing,
Right.
literally. Okay.
Right.
I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you, and I hope to see you in Southern California.
All right, it's nice meeting you.
Undergraduate degree in animal science at the University of Minnesota. Dr. Olson went on to complete her doctorate of veterinary medicine at the University of Minnesota College of Veterinary Medicine. Michaela is now part of the Wilson Veterinary Company Group, where she helps serve the veterinary needs of poultry producers. Wilson Vetco practices in 19 states with focus on commercial egg layers, production, medicine, working with about 65 million commercial egg-type layer chickens. Currently residing near New Richland, Minnesota, she enjoys spending time with her husband Tyler, their dogs, Goose and Griffin, and tending to her gardens and houseplants. Let's hear what Dr. Olson has to share with us.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, wow. Wow. I love that. Wake it up. Yeah. So I was asked today to talk about some current disease challenges that we're seeing in the field. So I'll highlight about 8 different challenges that we've seen over the past year or so, and that we're currently dealing with. And then I also threw in a couple that are kind of emerging issues that I think will become more prominent as time goes on. So I just wanted to throw this slide up here first. As kind of mentioned already, we work in 19 different states, so we have farms kind of all over the place, from north to south, east to west. So we get to see a really wide variety of climates, a wide variety of housing styles, from conventional cages all the way to pasture birds. So we get a good breadth of challenges that we see. And so, like I said, I put together, I think it's 8 there. Yeah, 8 challenges that we're currently dealing with. And I kind of broke them into categories, bacterial, viral, and parasitic. I did throw HPAI on there, but I'm just going to kind of breeze over it. There's a lot of talk and presentations, webinars, those sorts of things on HighPath, and so you guys get to hear a lot about that, so I'm not going to go into that too much today. This isn't going to be like an all-inclusive agents of disease course like in vet school, but we have a wide variety of backgrounds in the audience, so I wanted to give kind of some good little bit of background information on the disease challenge, and then talk about some of the clinical findings that we're seeing in the field. Some of them don't really match what the textbook says they should be, so that's kind of fun. And then kind of how they're spread, or how we think they're being spread, and then some prevention and control strategies, some things that have worked and maybe a few things that haven't worked for us. And then for some of the more recent outbreaks that are more like isolated to certain areas like coryza, and I'll talk about EDS as well. I'll give some current updates as far as what I know with those. So the first one is coryza. This has been kind of a hot topic recently. It's bacterial, AV Bacterium paragallinarum. There's a couple different subtypes of it, serotypes. The one that we're currently dealing with in the Indiana-Ohio border area region, Fort Recovery region, is serotype C, and that's what we've seen in other locations like Pennsylvania and Arizona. Usually the inciting complaint is elevated mortality, and then when we start to take a closer look, we see things like decreased egg production, feed and water consumption drops as well. And then when we take a look at the birds, hearing some of the respiratory noises, we like to look for respiratory noises at night, so go on night walks when the birds have kind of settled down for the evening. It's a little bit easier to hear things, so we hear some snicking and coughing. And then usually as the disease progresses, you start to see these gnarly facial swelling birds with the pretty severe nasoocular discharge. And then upon opening up birds on necropsy, I have a couple pictures on the next few slides, but mainly it's just some peritonitis, erysaculitis, and those are kind of especially complicated by other factors like E. coli and an MG. So how is it spread? It's spread direct bird-to-bird contact. Chickens of all ages, unfortunately, are susceptible, and infected flocks are a huge threat to uninfected flocks. It very easily spreads through complexes, and that's kind of the difficulty of it. As far as prevention and control strategies, I have biosecurity and cleaning and disinfection on each of these slides. But with coryza in particular, if you can clear out a complex, which is easier said than done, or a farm, and do some really good cleaning and disinfection and downtime, you can pretty well take care of it, because it doesn't really live that long without a host. Antibiotic treatment, we have tried some of that. Sometimes it'll alleviate some of the mortality and clinical signs, but usually they just kind of come back after treatment has been completed. And then obviously vaccination, and that's kind of been one of the limiting factors for the more recent outbreak in the Indiana-Ohio border area, is just a shortage of commercial vaccine. So for that more recent outbreak that's been going on for the last couple of months, it's in a 3-county area in eastern Indiana and western Ohio. There's probably 15 to 20 million birds in that area, and we're thinking probably around 10 to 15 million are infected with coryza currently. It's across multiple companies. Like I said, there's a commercial vaccine shortage. There are new serials of vaccines coming out, but they're very quickly being used up. Some have tried to import vaccine. No success there quite yet with that, but autogenous vaccines have really kind of saved the situation that's going on there, and been very helpful. There's a couple of different options that are available, and they've been able to be shared amongst those companies to kind of alleviate some of that commercial vaccine shortage stress. So, and then about the first week of, it was probably the first week of October, I think we heard about it. There's a new case of coryza in a 1.5 million bird complex in Iowa, northeast Iowa, kind of around the Union City area. And they said that they got pullets from that Ohio area, so I'm assuming that's probably where that came from there. All right, moving on. So our next bacterial disease is erysipelas. Usually with this, we just get the complaint of elevated mortality. Birds usually look fairly good. They don't look super sick. You can walk a barn and they very easily startle. They're, not much to see in them as far as clinical signs, but when you open up the birds, usually you see this pretty prominent enlarged spleen, and sometimes an enlarged liver as well. Like I said, we sometimes see some decreases in production and water consumption, but usually not really. Sometimes we see it in birds that have poor feather coverage, so whether it's older flocks or flocks that have been stressed in some way, whether it's nutritional stress or whatnot. And then I have a picture on the next slide of some of the skin lesions that we see with it. So this is a picture of, this is actually pretty more advanced case of it, I guess. This flock had some really poor feather quality. And this, it almost to me looks like the diamond lesions, the classic diamond lesions that you see in swine with erysipelas. So it's kind of interesting. But so how does it spread? It's kind of everywhere. It's found everywhere in the environment. It's usually spread in the feces of animals. So wild animals. Sometimes swine can be carriers, and I've had a couple of farms that have been across the road from a swine barn and came down with erysipelas, so I don't know, was that where they got it from? Potentially. So it can be, like I said, fecal oral, but it can also occur from breaks in the skin. And so, if they have poor feather coverage due to stresses, we've seen it in caged birds as well. Sometimes cage equipment can cause some feather loss or breaks in the skin. And so we have seen it in caged birds as well. It is a zoonotic disease, meaning people can get it from the birds. And so whenever we diagnose it, we make sure to, when we send out the results, we make sure to tell people wear gloves, be really, really careful when picking up mortality especially. And if you see any, usually on your hands, swelling, discoloration, to go to your physician. Fun fact, 2 out of 3 Wilson Vetco vets have gotten erysipelas. So, and I'm just getting over my round of penicillin. So, yeah. You don't actually have to cut yourself. You can just, little cuts that you have in your hand already, you can get it. So, fun facts. Put biosecurity on there again for prevention and control. Like I said, rapid mortality removal, making sure that, we've had people, dumping birds out in the pasture. Well, then those birds that are in the pasture have access to the mortality, things like that, you know, being smart about those sorts of things. Antibiotics, treatment usually does help alleviate some of that mortality. And then cleaning and disinfection, I maybe should have put kind of a question mark behind that. It's a little bit more challenging than coryza to get rid of in the environment, especially if you have it in a pasture. It's kind of hard to clean and disinfect a pasture. So vaccination is very effective as well. We either use a killed swine vaccine, given 2 doses in the pullet phase, or we'll do like a live wing web and a killed. We have had some not a live, I'm talking about cholera here for the wing web. Ignore the wing web comment. But we have tried some live turkey vaccine just as birds go into the lay house, and that has so far been effective as well. Okay, so cholera is the next one. So Pasteurella multocida, another bacterial disease. This is a video, but I don't think it's gonna work. No, it's a very poor quality cell phone video. But usually the inciting complaint again is elevated mortality. This was a video of birds are pretty lame, so it's probably in the more chronic form of the disease. So they were kind of hobbling around there on one leg. We see a lot of lethargic birds, difficulty breathing. These birds, when you walk in the barn, you know they're sick. They're hard to get up. They look sick. But when you open up the birds, usually necropsy is pretty unimpressive. We see some peritonitis, but really that's it. So here's a picture of that peritonitis. So it's spread, wild animals, pets, cats, things like that can be carriers, direct bird-to-bird contact, and it can be spread by people too. So sometimes we find this challenging, especially in some of our pasture flocks, just because of the tight-knit communities where they share barn help and things like that. So that's one of the things that we try to stress as far as biosecurity is if you can help it, try not to share equipment and people. And obviously excluding wild animals and other things from the barns is always a good thing. Antibiotic treatment can help alleviate some of that mortality and clinical signs. Again, this is another one that kind of likes to persist in the environment, so cleaning and disinfection can be a little challenging. And then vaccination, this is the one where we will do either 2 killed or a live wing web and then a killed injection. And that is usually pretty sufficient, either with a commercial or an autogenous vaccine. All right, so next up is, I think, our last bacterial disease is spotty liver disease, Campylobacter hepaticus. Usually presents as mortality. Birds are kind of a little bit more lethargic. You walk the barn, you can pick them up. They're really, really warm. They have quite the fever. And when you open them up, you see this pretty classic pinpoint lesions on the liver. Pretty much most people, when they open them up, can identify it as spotty liver. It can occur at any age, but we usually see it around 22 to 40 weeks of age. And we've seen it in all sorts of system settings, not just pasture flocks where they have access to things outside. It's been noted in cages as well. So mortality is usually about 1 to 4% a week, and there can be some pretty stark drops in production, and sometimes those flocks never really come back to where they would have been. So it's spread via the fecal-oral route, wild birds, rodents, contaminated soil and water. This is another one that really likes to hang out in the environment for quite some time, unfortunately. We've seen that some certain stress factors, like peak lay, hot, humid weather, so we tend to see it more so down into our southern states. But it's not just in that area. We have seen it elsewhere, but so summertime is usually spotty liver disease season. It's pretty rapidly spread bird to bird, and then they remain carriers for the rest of their lives with it. So this was just a fresh bird that was opened up, and we stuck a probe in there, and it's feverish. So anecdotally, I've heard of farmers with smaller flocks, if they can pull birds like into a cooler area, into like egg packing room or something like that, they can get those birds to recover and then put them back out in the flock. But I mean, you can't do that with larger flocks, obviously. Autogenous vaccination, that's what we are currently using. We've given most of our producers the option to use one or two injections of it in the pullet stage. So far, so good with it. It's really helped alleviate some of that mortality and clinical signs that we see with it. So, and then anecdotally, like water acidification and sanitation, and like I said, dropping barn temps or getting the birds cooled down can help as well. But some of that's easier said than done. Okay, everyone's favorite, HPAI. So, this is actually, I pulled this a few days ago, and now there's more confirmed flocks, but it's so far mostly Minnesota, the Dakotas, Montana has some new cases in commercial birds, mostly turkeys. So it's here. I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon, unfortunately. All right, the next one is EDS virus syndrome, and this is one where there was a more current or more recent, I guess, outbreak in northern Indiana area. We've seen it before in Pennsylvania as well, but that kind of isolated outbreak makes it a more current issue. So usually the birds look really, really good. They look nice and healthy, no clinical signs, no mortality, nothing, no drops in production. But you get these pale, thin, soft, shellless eggs, unfortunately. And we've seen it mostly in brown birds. I mean, I think there's been a couple of white flocks and a couple of, or maybe one, like broiler breeder flock. So it's not just a brown bird disease. This is just kind of our hypothesis, but potentially how it started in that Indiana, northern Indiana area. It's a very densely populated poultry area. There's ducks, there's layers, so potentially maybe some sort of direct spread from ducks or wild birds, and then after that horizontal spread. And I really think it was probably egg flats that were how it was spread farm to farm then, because there's a really high concentration of that virus on the eggs themselves. So any material that touches them, egg flats, the pallets, all sorts of things like that. So egg truck drivers, I think are a big risk in spreading that as well. Any age is susceptible. You see some pretty, I said this wrong. We do see drops in production, and any age is susceptible. We don't see any other real clinical signs in the birds though. So, and those birds, they never really come back to where they were or where they could have been most of the time. So a lot of the times depopulation is opted for just because of that. Vaccination, I think vaccination and depopulation have kind of helped control it in that area. So this is just kind of the current status of that northern Indiana outbreak. 55 flocks have been diagnosed with it. It's been over it's been over a year or so. The last flock was diagnosed on June 27th. 4 companies are involved and 1 independent. And like I said, they've used a combination of depopulation and vaccination to control it in that area. And more recently, we heard a new outbreak was reported in Southern California, I think like the LA area. So that's interesting. It'll be interesting if we hear active birds or if there's an epilink between the northern Indiana and California. So this is one that's probably one of the more like emerging, up and coming issues. Red mites. I feel like we've heard a lot about it from Europe, but they are here. We've had a couple of flocks. So far, the ones that we've dealt with have been pasture flocks, but we've heard of it in other settings as well. Usually, you see some decreased egg production, poor body weight and uniformity, because the birds or the mites do take a blood meal on the birds, so that's what can lead to some of that poor weight gain, uniformity issues, and then potentially anemia and death. So they are nocturnal feeders. They feed at night, so they're really hard to find in the barns. We've been able to find them by running like the egg belt and seeing them like on the eggs because they were hanging out where it's nice and dark. So that's kind of how we've been able to find them during the day. We also have started setting up some mite traps, making up and setting up mite traps to try to see if we can monitor populations, especially around the farms where obviously at the farms where we've seen it, but the farms around those farms then as well. Usually snake populations increase with warmer weather, but they hang out in poultry houses all year long. So people, other birds, animals, equipment, all sorts of things can spread it between houses. They don't take their blood meal on people, which is good, but the couple of flocks that we've had have been organic flocks. There's not a whole lot of options. We've tried some spraying of the birds in the environment with some pyrethrin concentration. Potentially, we've heard of formaldehyde in houses being helpful. And then we've tried some diatomaceous earth on the litter areas. It's maybe been helpful, but not as effective. There is a product in Europe that's not quite licensed here yet in the US, so hopefully that'll be coming soon to help with that. So yeah, red mites, they're here. They are probably here to stay, unfortunately. And then the last one that I had was, it's not really an issue per se that causes mortality or really clinical signs or anything like that, but more of a food quality issue is roundworms. So as we're moving birds, down onto the floor or even outside, we've seen more roundworms, and sometimes you can get some complaints of roundworms in eggs because they can migrate within the body of the bird and can end up inside of a forming egg, and then you get customer complaints, and that's not fun. So what we've done with some of our farms, our cage-free and pasture flocks, is doing routine roundworm counts. So we have this fun machine where it's pretty complicated, but you put some poop into it and it spits out this really pretty image where it fluoresces the eggs, and then it gives you a count as well, and then we use that to base our treatment off of. So we'll do like monthly or every other month of counts, and then treatment thereafter. The only treatment that we currently have is fenbendazole, and so we try to do this so we potentially might not create any sort of resistance with treating, just blanket treating flocks. So these are just some of my concluding comments. Emerging issues are evident, and they obviously always will be. I mean, I think overall, most of our flocks are very healthy. Larger, more recent disease outbreaks have been isolated to certain areas, for the most part, like coryza and EDS. And then, as we move birds, birds were put in cages for various reasons, obviously, but it did help alleviate some of disease challenges. So as we're moving birds down onto the floor, and potentially putting them outside, we're starting to see some disease challenge shifts, kind of some going back in time, and seeing some older diseases reemerge, like erysipelas and cholera. So makes it fun for me, but not fun for farmers. So that's all I have today. If you have any questions, I can take them. The QR code that's up there, that is linked to our newsletter if you want to sign up for that and hear about all things animal health. Dan and I try to put that together on as frequently as we can, but on a monthly basis at the least. So
Number one, you talked about antibiotic treatment.
right.
And so, in your humble opinion, does feed-grade antibiotics make a difference when you're faced with that onset of the original outbreak?
No.
Thank you very much. I agree with you completely.
Yeah. It might help with some of
I think we spent a lot of money and it didn't do us anything.
Right, and it might help with some of the secondary bacterial E. coli maybe, but no, yep.
Okay, second question is, let's take that same layer farm that's gone through an outbreak, you've had a vaccination program going for a while, now you're seeing clinical signs of fade. Have you ever attempted a rolling depop on a farm?
I have not, but I've heard of it.
Was it successful?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Thank you very much for the presentation. So all these diseases, I was just wondering in terms of early detection, whether it's spotted fever or whatever, or coryza, is there a change in behavior of the flock so that we could perhaps start early detecting warning and intervention, or until just get to the, what I'm getting is looking at a precision livestock farming and early detection, automatic 24/7, would it be possible? Can you find some sort of characteristics of the flock?
Right.
Not active moving or something that we can pick it up and start doing. I know for swine, for example, they use a sound.
Mm-hmm.
They could tell 7 to 10 days before the vet could tell you the respiratory disease. Would it be possible?
I would think so, and I think that would be fabulous. I mean, with like spotty liver in particular, we've seen just some drops in production, but nothing else, no mortality or anything like that. So potentially detecting that before we do see the mortality, and we've tried to do just some surveillance testing then, just some, but it hasn't been successful. So yeah, if smart people can think of things like, sounds or whatnot, like with what the swine is doing, that would be fabulous. But we aren't currently doing any of that really.
I just had a comment. Very good presentation.
Thank you.
Just had a comment. I was just recently saw a flock in northern Indiana that been vaccinated for EDS. They had an explosion of flies prior to them having some shell quality issues. So don't forget about flies as a possible carrier of these diseases.
Yeah, and not just EDS. So yeah, very good.
On my way.
Excellent presentation, thanks. Could you comment on FDN, which had been, more regional and then seemed to move into the Midwest and
the prevalence and also treatment options if there's any new ones?
Yes, we kind of see it everywhere. It's not geographically isolated as far as we see it. No new treatment options. We do sometimes try DMD with it. It sometimes helps. I don't know if it really does truly help, but I think we need more research around FDN and determining the root cause of it, so.
I know there's some going on. You guys are a big proponent of more research in that area too, since it seems to not have many treatment options, maybe not as big mortality issues you've discussed in some of the service production.
Yep.
Thank you.
Other questions? We still have a few minutes.
Very nice presentation, thank you. I see you talk about in different scenario the temperature of the barn. How, we do eliminate some symptoms and things. Do you think of in the future, currently we control the barn, try to achieve the temperature to the optimum temperature for animal production.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, in the future, maybe we can use that as a type of suppress or temporary short-term treatment or supplemental treatment of this disease.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that would be something that would be fabulous, especially like with the spotty liver. If it's hard to cool barns down in the heat of the summer down south, but if they can do it, if they can get some cool nights in there, it really helps with the mortality and the clinical signs. So
I see a great chance to engineer to collaborate with your
somebody in the audience.
Let's do multidisciplinary study together.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions? Maybe I can do Joe's bio since he's not in the room. He just popped out, so see what I can come up with. But any last questions? What kind of dogs do you have?
Border Collie, Australian Shepherd mix, and a little Terrier mix.
Oh, awesome.
And they're adorable.
They got the picture, all right?
Sounds good.
All right. I do need Lisa though, because she was running this on a Mac. I saved it onto a Dell, and it did not transfer very well, so she's gonna have to run slides off my computer. I come to you today with good news, and if for nothing else, if you don't like what I have to say, I am not going to talk until noon. How's that for your good news? You guys are going to get out of here. I've got about 40 minutes worth. There we go. We got one little polite clap in the back. Thank you very much. We've got such a dynamic situation going on in agriculture right now that I tend to wake up a little excited anyway in the morning. But this is really good stuff. How about this? Good is an interesting word. If I use the words good or bad, it has to do with in reference to animal agriculture. I am an advocate for animal agriculture and everything that it represents. And so we've got to live harmoniously, of course, with our agronomic counterparts in ag, and oftentimes those two coincide, that those that own the farm ground are also raising livestock, of course, and that's kind of a traditional model. And so there's a symbiotic relationship, but if I've got to pick a side, it's absolutely on the protein accretion side and what it means to society and how we're under attack and where things are going and where we sit from a perspective. Do I need to log myself in there?
Yes, you do.
Hang tight, guys. Hang tight. Is our IT department doesn't just allow like ABC 1, 2, 3 logins either. Okay.
There we go.
Sure.
Yeah. All right, here we go. All right. By the way, that is not a misprint. It is Rocktober. Back when we had Brock Purdy playing for Iowa State, it was Brocktober, and now we've got Rocco Brecht. All right, so it is still Rocktober. Thank you for the nice polite clap again. I am a licensed broker. If you take my advice, lose money at your own fault. So, How about this? Few points to ponder is recently Dr. Jason Ross over here, his colleague, asked me to teach a class at Iowa State University, an ANSI 435 class. And I enjoy going back to the university in doing so. But part of this was some points to ponder. And so what do you think? Do birds sing louder in noisy cities? Yes or no? You guys are going to have to give me more audience participation because I held that class for an hour and a half. Of course! Of course, because those that don't sing don't get mates and they die off, right? I mean, there's some evolutionary components that go on here. How about this? Do plants in a field emit a chemical if they hear or feel or vibrate a bug infesting them or one of their neighbors? The answer is yes. Yeah, you guys are getting better here. All right. Do plants vibrate? Do the plant roots vibrate when there's tertiary water that they wish to mobilize that they don't have access to? Yes, right? Right? Is animal agriculture more efficient? This is the layout for the group. Of course they are. And aside from the birds in the city, which I got no control of, everything else has to do with agriculture and some of the solutions and discoveries that we're having. And that's why when I speak to that younger generation, it's like, I am so jealous of you. I wish I wasn't my age. I wish I was your age. And I wouldn't make as many mistakes, mind you. But also the opportunities that are coming out are so tremendous here, right? So our agenda, and when I was visiting with Lisa, I had to revisit kind of a concept here of the sustainability impact of agriculture and where it sits. And so I went back and pulled out does anybody remember Mitch Albom, wrote a book called Tuesdays with Morrie? Yeah, great book. He also wrote a book called The 5 People You Meet in Heaven. Did anybody read that one? Terrible book, right? But I was hoping that the first one would be good. But I kind of stole his ideas here. 5 dinner guests and walk through agriculture. Then what are we going to do about it? And where are things going right here? So, if you could have dinner with 5 people, dead or alive, who would you choose? And given kind of the makeup of where we sit as an industry, probably not a huge surprise that Jesus would kind of be at the front of that list. And then I start to think about who else I'd like to have. And the Muslim faith, it is considered sacrilegious in order to show the face of Muhammad, but certainly having a little bit of debate go on wouldn't be such a bad idea. And I figure if I got those two, heck, I need to throw Gandhi in the middle of this one to kind of keep things all equaled out. And then I got intimidated, and I thought, I am not near smart enough in order to handle this conversation, so I've got to bring in a moderator, and that's C.S. Lewis, right? And this is all good and fun. And then I started thinking about who's my last guy, and it's this one, who actually doesn't fit the bill of the other 4. That's Norman Borlaug, the father of the Green Revolution. If we're going to start talking about sustainability, we've got to include him into the conversation here. Humble man from Fresco, did his schooling up in University of Minnesota, Nobel Peace Prize winner, certainly saw ushered in the era of progressive agriculture and what it meant to save lives, and he knew no boundaries. It did not matter whether he was in Africa, the color of your skin, it didn't matter. He was truly a humanitarian that tried to help all. World Food Prize named after him in his honor. It's actually going on right now in Des Moines, Iowa. But he wanted to save the world and thought that saved more than 1 billion people. And it's our Green Revolution. And he saw this meteoric rise in the production that we got off of the land and what it could mean to society. And that was his mission. But we've got a new one right now, don't we? Right? The spirit of Norman is largely gone, and instead he's being vilified about bringing toxic substances in, right? And GMOs. And by the way, how many people have died from the ingestion of a GMO? Raise your hand, right? Nobody, right? The safest science that we have in the world, yet it's vilified because it doesn't fit some political agenda. And instead, we have this revolution about where we're going to go organic. And by the way, there's some new rules that just came out this morning defining organic or GMO-free or antibiotic-free. And we don't even know what milk is anymore, do we? Right? That's not milk. This vegan plan, Beyond Burger, I tried that one time, it sucks. But this thrust of climate action is being solved by something other than animal agriculture, to me, is absolutely ludicrous. And it takes no boundary or takes no prisoners here, whether it's milk or your industry with this eggs down here, about how they try to get this. And I found the real cause of autism, by the way. Does causation equal correlation? Well, technically, yes. Correlation equal causation. Not always, news, right? But if the mainstream media, if this evidence was on their side of the fence, do you think they'd promote it, right? The use of glyphosate with autism, right? And so I think that we have a challenge on our hand. We've got a battle in the media side of it from a couple of yahoos in the upper left-hand corner. They don't know a doggone thing about agriculture, yet they're going to be the ones that start to push you out here. And we've seen the loss of liquidation of animals in California. This back in 2001. Hang on to that date because that's going to mean something here in a moment. And so, given the state of agriculture today, what would Norman do? Right? What would Norman do? And if we can kind of go back to that, I think we might find a few answers here. Right? Because the weather is changing. I'm not trying to get into global warming, but I'm just talking about the here and now. This weather is changing, and it's part of this ENSO pattern, this conversion from La Nina to El Nino. It is going on right now. It just is. There's no judgment here. The political climate is changing. We don't need to say too much about that. I grew up Catholic, right? And by the way, some of you guys did too, because nobody's sitting in the front row except for the guy. He's the one moderating right here, right? There's plenty of room. But I also work with some folks up in Northwest Iowa. The difference between when you deal with the Catholics versus the Dutch is the Catholics will actually do business with you if you don't go to their church, right? It's a much different thing. That was for Craig Rolls. Let's keep going here. Can we reconcile all of our differences in these competing forces? And I think so. I think we can. And as doomy and gloomy as you want to be if you open up the paper or some headline on CNBC, whatever it's going to be, I think we are on the cusp of an interesting time. We are in the midst of this transition from a 3-year La Nina into an incredibly strong El Nino. This El Nino is very, very strong. We have not seen the impacts manifested as of yet. Those of you that live in the Midwest, I got good news and bad news for you. The good news is you are going to have a warmer than normal winter, almost guaranteed, right? The bad news is you're going to have a wet winter, which means instead of shoveling snow, you get to shovel wet, heavy snow in the process here. We are going to more than likely be wet, and we're also going to more than likely be warm as we go through this transition. And our confidence in this transition, this is back from March of 2023. And the way that you read this chart is Feb, March, April, May, June. And the red line is the probability of an El Nino. This is what the forecasters were thinking in March of 2023, that we had, let's just call it a 50-50 shot, right? Let's fast forward to June, and now we are 100% sure that we're going into an El Nino scenario, right? 3 months, we go from, maybe to I'm 100% sure, right? Hold on to these time frames and this indecisiveness that we have, because I think it's going to mean something. 2 years ago, we had the huge drought sitting out in California. That's what caused the liquidation of the dairies that I referenced earlier. You also had the human factor, like meat was being drawn down. We still have riparian rights going on right now. Has anybody paid attention to what's going on in Nebraska? By the way, with Governor Pillen, a good agriculturalist, right? There was a pact signed in 1923 about who got rights to waters leaving the states. Pillen gets elected and immediately puts up a dam. Right? First thing he's going to do is put up a dam, and somebody's going to scream out, "You can't do that." Oh, yes, I can. And right, by the way, per this treaty, I can do so. I can hold on to my own water. And if we wish to renegotiate, we can start now, right? It was very, very intelligent. But we're going to lead to different factions of the country, depending upon where you live and where that water flows. Is going to make a heck of a difference. And the Colorado River is under a battle right now, and it's because of the drought in the last 2 years. 2021, this is what we looked at. Here's 2022, slight improvements, but we still have this large droughty area out on the West Coast. And here is where we sit today. Never mind, everything's okay, right? Forecasters can't get 3 months right. They can't get 3 years right. Why do we think 3 generations they're going to get this one right? Right? This is going to be a difficult one, because we are entering into decisions right now that impact 3 decades or even 3 generations, and we're going to feel that in the next few years as we go here. And regardless of whether you, it doesn't matter whether I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, you're liberal, conservative, it doesn't matter. Regardless of where you sit on this, you've got to agree on at least one thing. Hopefully we can agree on more. But agriculture sits right in the crosshairs of the decisions that are being made in Washington, D.C. that impact us and our livelihoods, right? Right? And I realize that we're generally a pretty homogeneous group here, but we don't represent a cross-section of society, but we are the solution as we go forward here. So our main input is corn across much of production, most of production agriculture. We've got this nice little trend line yield going. If everything goes normal, which that doesn't happen too often, of course, if everything goes normal, we are still in excess of 180 bushels to the acre on yield. Now, you'll see that 173 sitting right there is where we sit right now. We're a little disappointed this year. And if you take a look at where we sit over the last 5 years, 4 out of the last 5 years have not lived up to the hype, right? Just hold on to that trend line yield. We had about 1.75 bushels of potential every single year through the genetic companies that we put in the bag. We haven't seen that expressed as of yet, right? And I told you that we had 3 years of La Nina. That's right there. We were off a freckle prior to that. It doesn't always happen. This is not unusual. We've had 5-year runs before. Through much of the 2000s, we kind of stayed basically at trendline yields for the vast majority of the time. But I think there's got to be one question that pops into your head. And that is, if we see a 7 bushel reduction this year off of trendline yield, what happens if we ever get normal weather? What happens to corn yields? Or God forbid, what happens if we get good weather? Now what? Right? We're going to see this puppy explode. And I think we're right on the cusp of that. And we'll talk actually about time frame. I came from the hallowed halls of Iowa State University Econ Department, where the number one rule is you can predict price, you can predict timing, but never do both at the same time, right? Right? Well, I'm going to violate that rule because I think we've got a reasonably crystal clear vision of where things are going and how they're going to play out with this. Make no mistake, we're in a very, very sharp portion of the demand curve right now. So very small incremental changes in disappearance or carry out, however you want to look at this, lead to larger changes in price. So just be cognizant of these small adjustments and what they mean. And it cuts both ways, of course, right? And we only have 3 places we can go with corn. And we'll talk about ethanol, and I'll get into this just here in a little bit later, what that would look like. It's flat. And we'll talk about the electrification of a fleet and what it means to motor fuel. I'll tell you, that's all going to be okay. But ethanol is flat. There's no plants being constructed right now. We've got our foot to the floor as far as production of ethanol is concerned. We're extracting as much as we can, and the margins are good, right? $85 crude oil gives you decent ethanol margins. We're just flat, and it's not going anywhere. Livestock is contracting, right? We're pulling this down. So we can either grind it into ethanol, I can feed it to livestock, like God meant it, where corn to go here. But we've got a little problem with that one. And then I said our beef production is down a whopping 1.7 billion pounds in 2024 relative to 2023. And it ain't getting any better, right? Right. Cattle on feed report still shows that we've got heifers going back into the feedlots. Why? No, they're worth a heck of a lot of money, right? Right. So we have not started to rebuild a herd. We're going to shrink. So you got 2 different things here. Price of beef probably stays relatively high, but we don't eat as much corn. And the beef sector is the least efficient consumer of corn, of course. So a pound is not a pound. So pay attention to what that one looks like. Exports are the only hope for would-be corn bulls, and I'll tell you, it's not much of a hope, guys, and we'll walk through where that looks like. There is your 1.7 billion pounds of reduction in beef production. Pork and broilers both bump up just a wee bit, but the bottom line is that we are going to be down as far as animal feeding is concerned at this point in time. And if you guys want to get miserable, I love when Dr. Rolls said that he got out of the pork business. He remembers 1998. 1998, which by the way goes off my chart over here. There's only 20 years of data, and that's so far out there that it fell off the chart, so I had to kind of incorporate it back in here. 1998 was our sentinel year of, my goodness, everything just all fell apart, and it was terrible, and it was terrible. We had the lowest prices ever. My parents knew where they were when JFK was shot. Most of us know where we were when the Twin Towers fell down. I know where I was on December 16th, 1998, right? That was the Armageddon for the pork industry at that point in time, and led to what up until now was the largest losses ever. And we are experiencing those in the pork industry and just getting our head handed to us at this point in time. That's not what expansion's made about either. So I'm still talking about corn, but I want to kind of bring this back into relationship and kind of the why behind the what. If you go, well, what in the world happened? We got a little sugar high back here during the COVID era. These are demand curves where we sat and noticed it's this nice green line, fits pretty good, until whoop, we go up here to 21, 22. We think that everybody loves our products and everything's great. We're going to stay on that demand curve. And nope, in 2023 we came right back down, but we're still feeding $5 and $6 corn, and that's the problem with this industry right now. And here's why. Here's why. What happened? What's that right there? What's that big spike right there in savings? Why? Right, we had the stimulus came in, and all the stores are closed. So people go out and buy the only thing they can. They go to the grocery stores and they go to the meat case and pick up anything we can. And we thought we were dumb enough to think that was going to perpetuate. And I'll tell you, from an economic standpoint, if you regress real disposable income over this time frame, it is not statistically significant whatsoever. We have never had one of these before. So as an economic community, we missed it. We didn't see it coming. We'd not had that experience. There was nothing to tell you that would occur that would be statistically significant until you look in the rearview mirror and go, oh yeah, that's what happened. Well, no kidding, but it's too late by then at that point in time. Corn exports are projected to go up 365 million bushels year over year, and I'm about to tell you that is the biggest fallacy on the whole balance sheet right now. Corn exports have to be up, sales have to be up 22%. As we sit right now, they're up 7% for the year. So probably kind of holding pretty tight right in here as we go forward. And remember where we are on that curve, right? Small changes in supply equal big changes in price. So we're going to add to the bottom line. And I think you're going to see the bottom fall out of this corn market, but it's going to take just a little bit of time. Corn S&D looks like this. Last year we had 1.3 billion bushels. This year we're going to have 2.1, even with those inflated export numbers coming off of that bottom line. I'm here to tell you that 2 billion bushels is gracious plenty for the United States. We are not going to run out of corn. We might run out of willing sellers of corn at the price that it's trading, but we're not physically running out of corn. World situation is exactly the same. We are rebuilding stocks thanks to many different nations, Brazil being the most pronounced. The U.S. is okay with corn supply. The world is okay with corn supply. And we're still trading at a bit of a premium. I can't get the clicker. There it goes. The clicker work. That red dot would show this is not inflation adjusted, so we can make some arguments about where those curves should be. But certainly, $5 corn as we sit today, in my opinion, all things else equal, has a little bit of room to come down to the downside, and we just haven't realized that quite yet. Soybean supply situation is actually quite different. We were actually tightening up the stocks. We went from a 268 carryout to a 220. That's thanks by and large to some poor production that we had, not quite as pronounced as what it was in corn, but we didn't get the crop. We knew we had to have at least 50 bushels to the acre. We're hovering right around that 49.6, but we're tight, guys, right? And until we hand off the exports of the world to the Brazilians on or about February 1st, is we're going to be in a bit of a dogfight in the soy complex. World situation is much, much different, right? We've got more bottom line coming back at us here. Another 13 million metric tons on the bottom line. U.S. situation is tight. World situation is doing okay. And that's going to kind of start to put this parallel together about where things are happening. It's right here. Our friend Argentina represents the vast majority. Here's how much corn production is going to be up. There's 33 million metric tons of that. Argentina is 23 million. The correlation between an El Nino and Argentinian production is about 0.85 correlation, right? We're in a very, very strong El Nino. I think we've got a lot of confidence that moisture is going to be flowing through South America, specifically into Argentina. Argentina represents about 40% of the world's export capacity of soybean meal. And with them out of the market, where's the world coming? To us, right? But that's all going to change. And remember how these transitions start to really, they're abrupt. And I would contend that our transitions in the future are going to continue to get more and more abrupt. This is just one that impacts us, right? If you take a look at bean yields, we've kind of also flattened out. USDA recently came out and said, nope, we still have a trend line yield that is moving higher. I had a trader buddy in Chicago that contends, we flattened out yields. And sometimes I'm not very smart, but I did one really smart thing. I kept my mouth shut. That might be a lesson, right? I kept my mouth shut, and I made a call to a buddy of mine that was he was in charge of genetic distribution at Monsanto. He knows a few things about what's going on here. And I called him up and I said, is it true? And he goes, yep, we have flattened out yields. I said, dang, that didn't fit my bias. I wanted you to say something else, right? Why? It's all about the input side. Is Roundup Ready doesn't work as well as it once did back in the mid-'80s, of course, right? We've got weed resistance. And so as we introduce these new traits into the soybean, where we're not bringing in a hybrid, is if we put something in or take something out, it's a game here. And so in order to get dicamba resistance, in order to get these other traits in there, we've had to sacrifice yield for a little bit. He goes, don't worry, we're now working with those products in order to sustain this. But it is true that for the last 5 years, we've largely plateaued what that bean production capacity looks like. It will pick back up here again, right? Our soy deviation from trendline, corn was 4 out of the last 5, soybeans are 3 out of the last 5, with this year being the most pronounced. That's not a surprise. Guys, how much rain did we get in Des Moines, Iowa from August 15th to September 15th? Craig, it's your hometown. How much did we get? Close enough. Your hometown.
I would say almost zero.
Zero is what we got, exactly. We got absolutely no rain whatsoever. That's the time when we're filling pods, flowering those beans. They can lay there and wait for their impressive plant, mind you. But when you don't get any rain whatsoever, the only part I'm surprised with that is it's not a greater deviation. So again, I think that the genetic potential that we put in the ground from the bags is pretty good. Similar situation, I think we're trading a little bit higher than where we quote should be if the bean market were to read the book. This is an interesting one. Here's our trend line yield on exports. Take a look at our last 4 observations. And if you had to say, well, what about next year? Just taking a look at the last 4 observations, do you think it's up, down, or sideways? It's going to be down, right? Right? This is a real messy chart. Stay with me on this. China will import 100 million metric tons of beans. As we sit right now, they booked about 47 million metric tons. This time last year, they booked about 40 million metric tons, so they are ahead of schedule. The U.S. is behind schedule. Who's getting the bulk of the sales? Brazil, right? So we've got, which by the way, I thought China naked in January doesn't sound real good. They don't have any purchases is what I should have written right here, right? They've got 0 purchases on the book for January. So we've got this real life game of chicken going on where we look at it and go, well, heck, they've got to come to us because we're the only ones that have beans. And China is folding their arms and saying, not today, not today. And they're waiting to see just how quick those Brazilian beans will come out of the field and remain competitive here. Here's our soybean price regression. Looks like this. What are we going to plant? What are we going to plant? If you just drop down to the bottom line here and say, what's my net income return? This 3 lines from the bottom. If I plant corn on beans, I make about $50 corn on corn. Is I lose $50 an acre. Soybeans on corn, I'm going to make about $100 an acre. That's what those elevated prices of soy are saying. And we've got a little bit of a whisper in the market that is justifying that, saying, I need more bean acres. It's called renewable diesel. We'll touch base on what that looks like here in a moment. But right now, this should be a concern to us in animal ag of, am I going to lose corn acres? Now, if I would give you this and say it's springtime across Interstate 80. It is April 22nd. The ground is mellow at 75 degrees with the wind out of the south at 5 miles an hour. What is in that planter box? Corn. right? Even though it might not economically justify, you got a chance. Because we could get 275 bushels and blow it out of the water, right? That could happen. Farmers love to plant corn. But with this economic situation going on, even if we go from 94 million acres down to 88 million acres, let your eyes go with me here, give yourself some type of even compressed trendline yield, put exports back to what they were last year, and I get 2.1 billion bushels worth of carryout, which is almost exactly where we sit today. And I just shared with you that the United States has enough corn, right? Under this scenario, we can lose 6 million acres of corn, and as long as we remain out of the export market, which I'm reasonably certain we're going to be okay, guys, right? We're going to be okay if that occurs. Which brings us back to one of our earlier questions about what would our buddy Norman do? And what was his hypothesis was, it is the responsibility of society to utilize the most productive farming ground we have, so we leave that more fragile component laying fallow. And instead, what do we do? Right? Take a look at this. This is soybeans. If I overlaid Chinese demand, it would almost fit perfectly on this. But let's just go back. 10 years ago, we produced 80 million metric tons. 10 years, here's 160. We've doubled production in Brazil over the last 10 years. Unlike us in the United States, they get another crop, they plant that safrinha crop right behind it. 10 years ago, they made 60 million tons. This year, 120, right? Are we surprised? Are we surprised? But this has snuck up on us a little bit. We anticipated the soy side of it. The safrinha crops just kind of come along for the ride, right? And in our era of ethanol-induced prices that have kept it elevated, it makes it economically justifiable to do so. We've got one little teeny-weeny little problem in the United States based on this, and it just is coming into play. If you go to the far left side of that chart, the blue bars are what the USDA said that the United States was going to export. The gray bars is what the Brazilians were going to export. And in May of 2022, we said, don't worry about it, we got it. And we kept that attitude for a few months. We get into the fall, and so maybe we're going to export a little bit less and a little bit less. And then somebody figured out, you know what, the Brazilians are just owning this export market. So as early as even 6 months ago, we thought, don't worry, we're the king of everything, right? And these transitions are happening more and more abruptly, where suddenly Mexico owns the export market, and the United States is becoming a bit player in that, right? I was telling Jason Ross and I had dinner last night, and I was sharing that in 2018, the United States and Brazil, did I say Mexico, by the way?
Yes.
You guys just correct me. Don't listen to me when I make mistakes. In 2018, the United States and Brazil were neck and neck on soy production. In 2023, Brazil will produce 50% more than the United States, right? These are not just little subtle changes, and this should be a wake-up call to all of us, right? Brazil also came out earlier this year, in January this year, and said, don't worry, I can plant 5% more acreage every year for as far as the eye can see without having a negative impact to the environment, right? Think about what that does for prices if that's true. We've shared before about the United States is less dependent. A smaller number means that you're more independent. We're better on nitrogen. We're better on phosphate. Potash, we have to rely on the Canadians there so far. We have not managed to honk them off so much, and so we still have a decent trade relationship. We're in good shape. This is Brazil's Achilles heel right here. If they can't get those finances, if they can't get that product in order to put it in the ground, they're kind of took. Let's just take a quick peek at where their stuff comes from. And do you notice a common theme of a country of origination of fertilizers going into Brazil? What do you see? Oh my goodness, you guys are good. How much motivation do the Brazilians have to honk off the Russians? Zero. And while we've got NATO nations wringing our hands over the Ukrainian-Russian war, you've got the BRIC nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, right? That are also getting together talking about what's in their best interest. So this Brazilian situation, in my opinion, is absolutely fascinating. And I love going to Latin America. It's one of my favorite places. Number one is up until recently, the inflation rate is so doggone high that your dollar just goes farther every time that you go down to visit, mind you. They've got, as screwed up as our politics are, which, by the way, did you see we actually do now have a Speaker of the House, right? Did anybody have any clue what his name was prior to that being announced? No, I had no idea. So when they have to send out the bio along with the announcement, you know, there's kind of a dark horse that came into this race at this point in time. You also got the Mexicans, who are our number one corn consumer, that came out again earlier this year and says, we don't want your stinking GMO corn either. Our exports, if they're going to save the corn market, have got a lot of headwinds. Both competition as well as our number one customer really doesn't like the stuff. Here you have the former president of Brazil with President Xi signing an accord here. Our political tensions are terrible, and they have, in my opinion, Brazil is stagnant from a political standpoint, and by accident, it has been the best strategy humanly possible. They haven't managed to honk off the Chinese or the Russians, and they haven't managed to honk off the United States. That's pretty brilliant. It was an accident, in my opinion, but I still think that it's pretty brilliant. This whole time they're going along, China, who's going to become the savior of everything, at some point in time quietly announced they had a record crop in 2023. How much more corn do you think they're going to want from the United States? Nothing, right? Nothing. And at the same time, I talked to you that I said the fate of the hog industry is absolutely pathetic right now. Go eat some more ham and bacon. By the way, has anybody seen those posters that where Iowa came out with? 5 players from Iowa State. One was named Purchase, one was named More, M-O-O-R-E, ham and bacon, right? Or that's 4, I guess. Purchase More, ham and bacon. And that's brilliant, brilliant marketing. But we need to help out our pork production community at the same time that we recognize that 75% of agriculture with a capital A is involved in the agronomic side. And what kind of years have they had? Are farm prices, are land prices going down at all? No, they keep on moving up. So the net worth of agriculture with a capital A continues to move. Now, segments inside there, most pronounced, the hog market, isn't doing real well, but we, as a society, are doing okay, and that, my friends, is going to cause a problem that I'm going to talk about here in a little bit here. All right? What are we going to do with this corn and beans if we don't export it, which I don't think we are, and we've got a biofuels policy that's on top of this here. Biodiesel is largely dead. That was a transitional fuel, so that's got some handling characteristics that aren't real Captain Fantastic. Renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuel are where we're going. I believe I've shared this in the past, that renewable diesel, anytime we're converting food into fuel, I think it's probably a bad policy. But with all the dissension we've got in Washington, D.C., when's the last time you saw the left side of the political aisle and the right side agree on anything? And this one seems to be a kind of a coalescing mantra, right? That if you're from Texas, you've got refineries that are going up, you've got a vested interest in the financial success of the oil industry, and if you're from the left side of the political spectrum, we're actually doing something that perhaps starts to sequester carbons, all right? So we're doing this. And all told, is we're going to need about 15 million more bushels acres in order to fulfill this mission that we've got. We're adding 27%. More people in the red counties than there are in the gray counties here. There's our 27% increase. That's really going to start to come into play this summer of 2024 and beyond when these things get done. We are building out the processing capacity for the finished product also at the same time. And then comes along in September of 2022, we get the Inflation Reduction Act. I'm already a little worried about renewable diesel. Guys, that boat has already sailed. And we can talk about the political legs behind it, which I believe are pretty strong, but let's talk about something else. What if the political support, whether it's from us as a populace or from the congressional delegation in Washington, D.C., loses a little bit of emphasis, right? And we've already put that infrastructure that I just showed you into the ground. Now, those of you that run a business or took an econ class, let me ask you a question. If I can cover my variable cost of operation, do I continue to run? Yes, right? And so once I built all that infrastructure, even if the Congress plays the old Lucy and Charlie Brown with the football, whoops, I took it away from you, what's going to be the impact? Are those plans going to run?
Yes. And what are they gonna produce? Soybean meal, exactly, right? So it doesn't matter. So I'm not trying to be a political wonk or even have an opinion about whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. It just is. We're putting these plants in the ground. We're going to produce a soybean meal, and we, as a consuming society, had better figure out what we're going to do with it, because I think it offers a heck of an opportunity here. Renewable diesel has already gone here. Ethanol, as I shared with you, is absolutely flat. We built up that infrastructure back in the early 2000s. We flattened that one out. You've got the current administration has got the toughest ever emission rules that are coming. And if you just take a look at that red line, that's motor fuel disappearance under that assumption that we institute. We hit a peak of internal combustion engine production in the United States in 2017, and it's waned ever since. Started with Tesla coming back onto the market. We hit COVID with all of a sudden we just kind of contracted the entire production. Recently, the UAW strike, which by the way, do you see Ford caved in? You see that? Ford caved in last night, this morning. 25% increases in wages. And if we think, because Ford was saying, guys, we can't do this. If we agree to what you're saying to the union, if we agree to what you're saying, we're going to be bankrupt in 10 years. The union doesn't care, right? Big deal. That'll be 10 years of us in order to get our wages before you fold in the doors and it says somebody else's name, and then we'll just go work for them, right? It was a callous, very, very callous thing. We need to take a lesson from this. And as a side, I grew up in Waterloo, Iowa, just outside of Waterloo, Iowa, home of John Deere. And I was 13 years old. I'm not making this up. I was 13 years old before I discovered that the words damn and union were not one word. Because that's all, my dad was a supervisor. He actually ran the foundry down there, and that's all I ever heard was damn union this, and you know, it kind of went. If we don't take a lesson of where this is going, with us aging baby boomers starting to draw from the system rather than contribute and putting that burden back onto the younger workers, we better. Because we are giving workers the power, right? And this is just, I think, one of the tips of the iceberg. That was a complete sidebar of where I'm going with this. All right, but as we've got this decrease in the utilization of ethanol, at the same time, you've got every single airline that has published their commitments to the utilization of sustainable aviation fuel. I glossed over it there earlier, but there's a very, very key component about renewable diesel can go into the pipeline. That's significant, guys. Biodiesel can't. It attracts water. It's got some handling characteristics. Renewable diesel is chemically nearly identical to its petroleum brethren and can be put in the pipeline. Therefore, we can utilize it commercially much, much better. It's a fascinating system when you sit with those pipeline guys. It's like an ATM. That if you put physical product in the pipe in Houston, you can withdraw it at the Minneapolis airport, right? It's like this giant ATM. It's like, that's fascinating stuff on how it works and how they keep stuff separate. It's really, really, by the way, how I told you this, you guys know how fast the pipeline moves? How fast do you think it goes? Right? And it's about 5 feet in diameter, running underneath us all the time. I'm not even going to get into this carbon sequestering piece with Summit or Navigator, but I could. How fast do you think that thing moves? Right? I thought, maybe 50 or 60 miles an hour. 5. Yeah. It's walking speed. Right? It's like, man, that's got to take a long time for physical product. That's why they instituted some of these items here. The SAF Grand Roadmap that was presented by the Biden administration in September contains basically this mission is that I want 3 billion gallons worth of renewable diesel by 2030. I want 35 billion gallons, all of it, all that we're going to utilize within a commercial aviation fleet by 2050, and that's what those projections are taking a look at. All we're really doing is making kerosene, which is one great big honking molecule of carbon and hydrogens that are devoid of oxygen. The conversion of ethanol, which has an oxygen associated with it, you've got to cleave that off. It takes a lot of energy to do it, and then you kind of smash them all together. But we have 7 approved vectors to get to kerosene. This is deep in that same item that I just showed you from September. 1.2 billion tons of stuff that we're going to commit to sustainable aviation fuel. Here's all the different ideas. Exxon 6 months ago gave up on their algae product, but the Biden administration can do it. Yep, I don't believe that. MSW stands for municipal solid waste. We flush in the morning, we fly in the afternoon. And these are all really, really good ideas, but that's all they are. right? None of them have been proved at a commercial scale, with the exception of 2. Can you pick those 2 out? Right? Guys, that's us. That's us. We know how to plant the crop. We know how to grow it. We know how to harvest it. We know how to store it. We know how to transport it. We've got this one down. We've got the processing facilities, whether it's ethanol or that we're processing it, pulling out the oil, and then turning it into renewable diesel, which then can also be actually converted into sustainable aviation fuel. And so a full 12% is supposed to come from us, right? Right? Here's what the math looks like. This is a complete guess on this. I spent some time with some chemists. That if we get 2.5 gallons of bushel of sustainable aviation fuel, we're going to need about 7 million more acres to get to that 148 million tons that the administration commits to. That's 30 million more acres. Do we have a problem? What was the first number I wanted you to remember with the addition of these soy facilities? 15 million more acres of soy coming out of ostensibly corn. And now I need 30 million more acres in order to go from corn, ostensibly from soybeans. Right? Right? We got a little problem, don't we? And this is where the intersection of logic and accidental governmental policy come together. Because I think it all works. It's dumb as can be. But we abandon our exports. We, as the United States, become domestic producers and consumers of our own goods from an agronomic standpoint, and it offers an opportunity then for the export of proteins, right, as we go forward here. Kind of go through the map and just take a couple of assumptions of where we're going to go. This is the hog diet and monogastrics are by far the biggest recipient of the benefit. We go from a $6 corn, $400 soybean meal environment, 75-cent fat. Fat's going out of our diets, regardless, guys. Is another industry is going to bid them away. And right now, $1.50 choice white grease is the equivalent of $80 crude oil. So just kind of use that as your swing point. So if we are trending towards $90 or even $100 crude oil, that number is going higher. We are not going to feed fat in our diets, and we better figure out how we're going to get those conversions here. But take a look what happens. If we utilize that energy content of soybean meal and discover what that looks like inside of a monogastric, there's an opportunity. Broilers, much, much closer to home for you guys, given the genetics and that feather coat, those sulfur amino acids that are necessary also provide a 10% savings. Scott Andrews is here. Charles Shittiger and Associates helped me with this math and about how this all comes together. The dairy side, beef side don't get the same benefit. This is all against a backdrop of production agriculture hitting new highs, and when you kind of just break it down by the numbers of the different stomach styles here, is you don't get much on beef or dairy. Is there any synthetic amino acid sponsors on your list here? I didn't see it. You're in trouble, right? We flood this market with intact protein, so that we don't need a whole